generally, I started this video chat series. It was originally sort of a satire on the idea of video chatting, and then it played well with the COVID theme. Um, but the objective of it is really to gather as much information as I can about how different places and different sectors of the real estate space are being impacted as a result of COVID. And generally, people seem to be of the opinion that it's our duty as consumers and as professionals to work together to overcome this new set of challenges. And I felt that having the right information is helpful in accomplishing that goal. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for joining me and providing insight.
Yeah, thanks for
And
having me.
then for those who don't know you, I was wondering if you could just do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we can kind of spiral out of control from there on the dialogue of how things have changed.
Yeah, so I'm Monika Rau. I consider myself an urban planner, community builder, and I also have my real estate license, though it's not active. I currently work for Ratio.City, which is a data analytics platform for land use professionals. And I had just graduated from my MBA in December, jumping back into the
Congratulations.
workforce. So thank you very much. So happy to be back in the workforce and still in the real estate space.
Awesome. I guess you've kind of touched a lot of different areas in real estate throughout your career, and it seems like you have quite the academic background as well. Have you the place that you're at right now? Have things changed? Would you say more or less by comparison to some of the insight that you're getting from others in the industry in previous positions, like CB as an example? Or
hmm It's a good question. I'm thankful personally in the way that I actually have always been working remotely.
right,
So from that perspective, I think we are lucky as a technology company
for sure.
in that respect. But of course, everything's changing drastically for everyone. I mean, even individual roles are changing, and expansion plans, for example, mine are changing.
Yeah,
So I would say we're equally as in shock. And I think
right,
that's more what's getting people, is because this is so unfamiliar and
for sure.
uncharted territory. And we're really just trying to adapt and figure out what's next. The
Yeah.
uncertainty, I think, is really killing everyone.
For sure. And that's
Yeah,
really what it is, right? Like, and that's, I think at the beginning it really manifested itself as fear because it was like a fear of the unknown. And then you got through like I think we were just talking about this prior to recording, but you get through the first 2 weeks of it and it kind of sucks. And then you realize, okay, I could survive. I survived the 2 weeks of it. I could
right,
do this for, indefinitely, I guess, because that seems to be the timeline right now.
right.
Um,
But really, though, we don't know. Like, there
I
has been
know.
no information out to
Yeah.
be like, okay, let's clarify. This is a three-stage process. Even
Yeah.
though the court has come out with this general reopening strategy, we have no idea.
Yeah, no, and it's variable as well, right? Like the reopenings are dependent on hitting certain targets of the process of flattening the curve, I suppose. So it is very very arbitrary, and we're also depending so much on other people, which is how the economy functions, really. But when it comes to a social or health crisis, all of a sudden it's a lot more difficult to wrap your head around.
Totally. And it's serious too, right? Like, there is fear. There
Yeah,
will be for a while. And that's also a question of the future. And I really I'm so curious about that, because
yeah.
normal will never be normal
Yeah,
again.
no,
Yeah.
for sure. I think things are definitely going to be very different.
Yeah.
I think it would be comparable to your 2008, post 2008, or even like post 9/11 world, right? Like there's going to be a meaningful change that we'll be describing to our kids in 10 years.
Right.
Oh, back before COVID happened.
Yeah. And
Um,
admittedly, during that, I mean, oh wait, I was just simply too young. I wasn't in
mhm,
really the workforce yet, right? I was
yeah,
still in education, and I suppose I don't really recall it hitting the family that closely. So
no,
yeah, I personally can't speak on it. But so this is really the first time that I've experienced
yeah,
something like this, and it's wild.
yeah. No, it is for
Yeah.
sure. One of the big themes that I've been drawing out of a lot of these conversations is how people are leveraging technology as a result of this. Like it seems like this is, and this might actually go well with, as a segue from what we were just discussing, that meaningful change. Like, especially in the real estate space where things are very archaic, and in the development timeline as well. Um, this seems to have surfaced as almost a a paradigm shift or a catalyst to showing the old boys that, you know, you can meet without meeting people in person? Or
I
what?
love that you're saying this.
Yeah. How, yeah, these are my words. So, how are you finding, as a technology provider that touches that world? How are you finding that the impact as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I think you have a great point. This is a dinosaur industry, real
Yeah.
estate in general. It, to me personally, it hasn't changed that much over the
Yeah.
last few decades.
Yeah.
So I think this disruption is very much needed. And like anything, I think this situation is expediting a lot of things that should have occurred, as we were saying much earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people are learning how to adapt to not having in person. Although I will say, I think like many industries, relationships are so important, and in person is where maybe you feel the most confident and trustful to others.
Yeah.
So that will have an impact, but we are learning to depend more and more on Zoom calls and Slack and other communication tools that previously, actually, we probably even didn't have subscriptions to,
Right.
and didn't necessarily believe that that was possible. And so it's kind of nice to see that, and I'm really, really hopeful that this will actually transform into our future workplaces, and whether that's being able to work remotely part-time. I don't think it necessarily should be full-time. I don't think it has to do that full switch.
Right.
But I think these tools should never go away. I
Yeah.
think they should always be accessible, and if anyone needs to, they should be able to plug in and have a meeting, no
Yeah.
matter how important or unimportant it may seem.
Hmm.
I think these tools are really important. And I think they're going to come through a lot more, and it's just proving to everyone that this really is possible, and we can also be productive, if not more productive than maybe what we were in the office when we had so many meetings and so many confrontations that
Yeah.
we couldn't necessarily control.
It's really interesting that you say that and you use the word productive, because I just spoke with Brett Llewellyn Thomas from he's at Nova Ridge now, and he's a colleague of mine from Guelph as well, and he was saying that it seems like actually the consultation process of all of your engineers and throughout the development, you know, your soft cost phases of development, actually seems to be more productive now, because there's less coordination, there's less logistical challenges. Like, I had thought that it was such an intimate and collaborative process that you needed that face to face, but and to be pointing at your drawings, etc. But I guess I was completely wrong in that assumption. And I thought that was a really interesting insight. I also think that on you hear about this concept of temporal flexibility from a researcher named Sylvia Golden at Harvard University. She
What's it
talks
called?
about temporal flexibility. Basically, she does a lot of research on like the gender wage gap. I don't really dabble that much in that stuff, but it's just basically the idea that, you know, people will pursue, and that she would apply the gender bias to it, but people will pursue careers that allow them for the flexibility of the workplace. And I think that our generation, like, I think that you could apply an age lens to that too. Do you think that the like if we do see lasting change to the way that we interact with the central business district, with, you know, your financial cores, with office buildings, that will have a lasting change on the way that we consume space? Like,
Yeah, I do. I mean, like I said, I'm not an active realtor anymore, so this is not speaking from experience, but I mean, in general, we're already seeing the vacancy rates, and that you don't necessarily have to be in that office space. I'm already reading that there's going to be such apprehension, and rightfully so, also legalities on the internal side on how people are spaced
yeah,
now going forward once we reintroduce people into the office. And that's going to be so important. I mean,
for
I
sure.
would be terrified to go in a workspace, and I'm very fortunate. To your point, I actually love the role that I'm in because I do have flexibility and I can work remotely essentially from anywhere, though I'm expanding in Vancouver. But that was one of the main reasons too for that, right? Like, that was really important to me. I think that's really important to a lot of people, particularly of our generation. And I mean, anyone, I think that's a high concern for people is,
Yeah,
what does office space look like? How am I keeping safe? Um, is this permanent? Like, how do we balance this new remote work, what we've learned that we actually could be more productive, but also recognize that we do need to be in the office space. I think some industries more than others, like you said, like maybe legal and banking, I think there's maybe a lot more in-person work and meetings and among council that might have to be done in person.
Hmm.
I know the cities are really struggling with that too, especially when it comes to community engagement. There's always going to be an element of in-person that you will want,
Yeah.
and that the public will crave, right? So I'm not sure, but I think it'll be a matter of industry first. And
Yeah.
in terms of reopening to it, it might even be a matter of, I don't know if it's age group or vulnerabilities, but
Yeah.
there's going to be a certain pattern that will have to be followed. And for sure, there's going to be a general loss of office space. I can guarantee it. To me, it seems like a pro on all sides, right?
Yeah.
Employees are open to it. And I think it's been over the years evident that they actually want that lifestyle. And
Yeah. And now we've proven that it works. So
yeah, and
that's the
employers can
reason.
save, right? So
Yeah. It's interesting. Did you see what Cushman and Wakefield put out from their Netherlands office? The floor mats that allow you to apply social distancing in the office.
oh, did they put up floor plans? I want to see
Yeah.
this.
So basically,
Oh,
it's like these big mats, like carpets or rugs that you put under all the desks that like draw circles of where you
like
like.
signals.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's pretty interesting.
Stuff like that though, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I do have a curiosity as to what, like, I know that we're going to see, some people, I guess, consuming less office space, but then also, but also then your demand for space per person increases, right? So my curiosity is whether or not we'll see a net increase in the demand or a net decrease in the demand, because you need more space to keep people spaced out, but maybe
Right.
less of it because to protect the bottom line, or because you're rotating shifts or whatever, right? So
Right.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
curious to see how that all plays out.
that'll be really interesting. Hopefully we have some really good monitoring strategies so that over
Yeah,
the years we can follow that. And
for sure.
we're obviously in the midst of creating the new office space, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I guess on that note, do you expect that we're going to see more change in the short term? And again, obviously, like, this is a little bit of a forecasting question, so I'll
It's
throw
fun
the
to talk.
disclaimer. I'll throw the disclaimer
Yeah.
out there that neither of us are economists. But do you think that things are going to change more in the short term, at least from your lens, like in the consumption of space, in the way that you guys are doing business, or the way that you're advising your clients and they're developing properties, as an example? Or do you think that things are more likely to return to normal? That would be like the next step. Like, do you think that this is sort of, let's say, the peak of the challenges that we're facing? And it might not even, you could answer that question anecdotally based on feedback that you've received from clients if you wanted as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, optimistically, I'd like to say that we're at the peak now and we will not deal with any challenges, but that's not true.
Right.
um, I do think, as in shock as we are and as terrible as this situation is, I think we're going to see overall, in a bigger picture, more challenges or impacts in the longer term following this than we are right now.
Right.
And that's only because, as we were just discussing, when we start implementing, introducing people to the workplace and all of these adaptations that we now have to change our entire policy framework to follow, to also go into the future, because even with planning, it's vision planning, right? You're
Yeah.
forecasting. So it's always going to be what's next. And that has already changed. We can't really use the past anymore because that's essentially irrelevant for a lot of things. We can't even use what's currently happening because we don't know. So it's only going to be how we start to change and how we carry that through in the future, so that we continue to provide safety for people. We continue to provide people with the ultimate lifestyle that they want, but also balancing with optimally being economically smart. Like, it's just, there are so many factors.
Right.
And I think that in the long term, 3, 5, 7, and even the next decade looking at it, I think those are where we're going to have to be really smart and wise about the strategies that we're implementing, that we're constantly changing, to make sure that this ultimately doesn't really happen again, right? Or that
Yeah.
we're at least mitigating something that could happen again that's very catastrophic. So
Yeah.
as we see these trends, I hope that more information will come out to us that we can actually use to be proactive about these things.
Yeah. That's great insight. And I think that, I mean, now this thing's on everybody's radar, right? Like, acknowledging it as a risk. And obviously it was on Bill Gates's radar this time last year, but I think that you're right. We're going to have to make some meaningful change to mitigate this ever happening again, or at least be able to deal with it in a meaningful fashion so that the show can go on. Because I think gradually the economic challenges that result from this could be just as difficult as the health challenges and social challenges.
Right.
Um, do you find yourself giving? I want to touch a little bit on what you guys do as well, like on the data side of development and
Yeah.
like that. Do you find yourself? Sorry, I just kicked my table. Do you do you find yourself like? Is there any general advice that you find yourself giving to clients, like in a client interaction or other people in the industry, on how to deal with this as an organization or as an individual? Is there any sort of insight you can provide on what you seem to be, I guess how those conversations seem to go?
Yeah. I think we feel very lucky that we are a technology platform and we're able to help in these situations. It gives you a lot of hope to be able to bring in information and actually make it useful for people. um, what's great about it is that there's a lot of people now that are working with open data and big data and creating, or at least trying to create solutions.
Yeah.
And so we actually recently did a sidewalk widths map um, based on the open data from the City of Toronto, and we're featured in the Global Mail, which we're really excited
That's
about.
awesome.
Yeah, but things like that we're able to produce and help in any way that we can to actually see patterns, not just on a block by block, but citywide, regional, to be able to see things at scale, I think really helps people, especially now when we're all kind of in this trauma stage, right? And I think reliant and evidence-based data is something that you can really put hope into, and it, for me anyway, it really comforts me. I really
I
like
would
data.
agree.
I like things, yeah. I like things that I'm able to be like, okay, you can see a pattern. There are ways that we can get around this and be smart about active transportation in the city, and how we might be able to use that to better plan in the future. So yeah, we're hoping we can do more of that, not only with the public, but also agencies that we are currently working with, like the City of Toronto, to better plan for the future.
Right. I think that's an awesome byproduct of what you guys do, like in interacting with the real estate space. It's cool to see that in being presented with a challenge like this, you can leverage the data that you guys are using to work on again, like I guess the big challenge that we're all facing, which is how do we do this, especially spatially, like how do we do this in the physical environment to protect everyone, to continue that progress that we've made as an economy, especially in like housing development, et cetera. So that, because that is such a big part of our GDP that it's obviously necessary to try and keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. And there always will be questions now about the safety aspect of it and the viability. So it's nice to be able to provide some sort of context of that.
Right. Does there seem to be any changes like in the viability analysis of projects? And I don't know if this is too in depth for what you guys are doing, but are people looking at, like, I'm assuming when people are coming to your organization, really looking at maximizing an existing site, right? But when you're looking at groups, or when you're working with groups that are in the process of acquiring land, does it, like, does it seem like we're seeing a trend towards like sort of uh, best case, worst case analysis rather than sort of that bull case? Like, does it look like there's a little bit of fear or speculation on the negative side priced in or apparent as a result of these changes? Like,
Yeah, that's something actually I've been wondering too. I'm afraid to say I think it's a bit too early
right.
to even speculate that. I imagine it will be the case. And you've even seen some large acquisitions maybe hold off. Google's been doing some hold offs on its real estate
Yeah.
that it's supposed to acquire. So I think on a smaller scale, I can't directly answer that, especially in the Toronto context, but
For sure.
I do think that that's probably coming. I think people are more right now just on a solid pause.
Right.
It's more for the sake of, we're on this hold because there is just that much uncertainty that we just don't know. And until we at least have a better idea or a timeline, or when this vaccine's coming in, so we can slowly understand how this whole shift of the new normal will come into play.
Right.
I think we're just we're all just really hoping that we can figure it out in, the next few weeks or months so that we can continue on with whatever that new normal of business is for
Right.
everyone. So it'll be interesting to see that, but I don't have an answer for you for
Sure.
that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Beyond what you mentioned you guys are already doing, what other ways do you think that the real estate industry can leverage data solutions like you guys are using to make better real estate decisions or to solve this new set of challenges, especially?
Yeah. I think the cool thing about our platform too at Ratio.City is that our clients are able to also overlay their portfolio of assets,
Right.
which I think is really useful for them because they are able to then go in and filter certain criteria or layers that are useful to them for these sites, or whether it's existing or future acquisitions that they're looking at. And then it's kind of, it puts it in their hands, which is really nice because I think a lot of people, even though there is open data available to everyone online through every municipality, it's really the question of what to do with it
Right.
and how do I use it and what's most valuable to me, so that I can use it in the best way for my company and for whatever's upcoming even. And it's hard to see that foresight, right? To gain the
Yeah.
certain insight that you're looking for your teams is difficult to do. And that's why we're so pleased to offer something like that, that maybe is really hard to conceptualize.
Right.
So trying to create that visual and those options for clients is what I most enjoy about seeing from our platform.
Right.
Um, I think the other really cool thing is, at least for me, and maybe this is just a nerdy thing, but I love 3D.
Right.
Um, Anything that helps you
Yeah.
visualize something, especially on a grander scale and up against precedents or what have you, is really cool to see. And hopefully that will also help people just in terms of, okay, data maybe isn't just, text or code, or I can actually see this, like this is real and this is the trend that I'm watching in front of me happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting to think in that way. I've always thought it was funny as well that it's such a spatial concept that we use in real estate, and especially now with the verticality of it, which I learned is actually a word now. But
Verticality.
yeah, I don't know. I saw it in a show. She was talking about New York. I can't remember now, but anyway,
Felt compelled to use it.
yeah. I've always just found it funny how we're still using 2D so much, and there's so much available for developers to interact with space in different ways.
Totally. And in our industry, you have to admit, totally visual.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
absolutely in
I would
front of
agree.
you, have to, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that a lot of people really want to, like, especially from the finance side of things, they, you really want to apply that scientific and numbers based lens to it. But I think that it's such a design based thing right now, especially with how competitive it is in the space, that I would totally agree with you. It's such a visual thing.
Yeah. It's almost like old school PowerPoints, like summarize it for me nicely, but give me the
Yeah,
juicy stuff at the bottom and the appendices so I can
yeah, yeah.
see.
What other like lasting changes do you think we're going to see as a result of this sort of uh, let's call this a test run that we're seeing with technology's ability to really interact with the real estate space? Like, is there any other trends that you've noticed that you might not have thought of or might have anticipated, and that have kind of come on in full force as a result of us having to, I mean, obvious beyond the obvious, like Zoom or whatever it is, but I think we're going to see some stuff in 3D virtual viewings, et cetera. Does that seem like that'll kind of take off, or do you think it's more of it's
Hmm.
still a little early?
I think and hope that 3D is the new norm now.
Yeah,
I think it's really powerful and there's no reason why we shouldn't be using it.
yeah,
So that will be, I think, very prevalent across the board eventually. Zoom has been really common. I think a lot of companies I've spoken to still don't use Slack, but I think it's a great tool.
right,
I think the tech industry is very much familiar with it, but it may not have been so important in the past in traditional industries, especially in development and real estate.
yeah,
But I think it is a great tool, or Microsoft Teams, or any of those platforms.
yeah,
I think a company will have one of those in place so that they are equipped to handle
right,
whatever might happen in the future. So that is a change for sure, because I think prehistorically companies may not have seen the value in investing in such a tool, right?
yeah,
Um, Unless something like this happened. Um, there's also kind of a broader scale that I've been noticing. Like, I think on the topic of things being expedited faster than they normally would have, um, I think a huge change, more so than the private side, is the public sector, and how, because they, from my knowledge, I've never really worked in the public sector on a full-time basis, but I had noticed, like, they don't really have these tools, and they didn't have them in place, right? It is a
Right.
very traditional sector.
Yeah.
So it'd be really interesting. I think the onus is very much on them now
Yeah.
to embrace technology and finally change their systems. So I'm actually really interested to see what that looks like. And that could be anything from internally to how they're dealing with not only their employees, but also the public. Like right now, every city, including the city of Vancouver, is really struggling with how do we move forward with these public engagements when we want to continue implementing our policies and policy changes.
For
And
sure.
they don't want this on hold forever. It can't be on hold forever. And actually, now than ever, these people have the time to actually put in their voices and thoughts.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting to see how they shift. It'll be interesting to see even how they work in terms of like transportation issues. I'm not sure what it's even looking like in Toronto. I assume it's similar, but most people, because they're home, their ridership is down. TransLink here is down 83%. They're trying to figure out how to cope with that, but also how to bring people back in. And the city has always had a huge emphasis on transit here, and they've done really well. But after this sort of occurrence, how do you convince people even more to use transit and to trust the system?
Right.
And even with street design, and there's a lot of great initiatives being done by both Toronto and Vancouver now about curbside extension and pedestrian transportation, which is great.
Yeah.
But there's so many policy relations and intricacies to these changes that I
Yeah.
think the municipalities and the public sector really are going to have to sit back and embrace a lot of things differently.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
I'm just running through scenarios in my head now as you're describing this, because I never really thought about that, and it is very intricate. Like if the public transit ridership uh, gets ported over to vehicles, then that also creates a challenge for extending your sidewalks, and so there's a lot of moving parts in that I'm glad I'm not the person who's tasked to solve that
Oh my
problem.
goodness, there's so much. And then if you're talking about pollution and then people are driving their personal vehicles again,
Yeah.
this pollution that they've been trying to work towards zero
Yeah.
emissions, which we actually have been doing a great job of on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Well, now your climate emergency action plan isn't so, it's
Yeah.
just everything is so it's insane how
Yeah.
everything is so interconnected.
It is interesting to see, though. Like I never really even thought about the role that the municipal government could have in really solving a lot of these problems, or especially economically, like you just described,
Yeah.
right? Like I understand that these are big public sector groups, and they don't often have the agility, nor I guess as much of a protection towards the bottom line as you would see in the public sector. But the I would agree. I think that seeing changes in their space and leveraging technology could actually really provide a lot of value for creating greater efficiency in the development process in the future. And I honestly never even acknowledged that prior to this conversation. So I think that's incredible insight.
And I
Uh,
do have to give credit, because the city of Vancouver and all municipalities across Metro Vancouver,
yeah.
all 21 have actually opened up since this started, have provided their employees, for the most part, if they can, with abilities to work remotely, and have always stayed open for development applications to continue online.
Nice.
Yeah.
Does it, have you noticed then in that respect, like, is there a quantifiable decline in the productivity as a result of that, or does it
It
seem to
could
be pretty
be.
steady?
I'm
Right.
not sure yet. Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, because I like it's easy to quantify things like construction, et cetera. Like, okay, we're building 30% slower, but with the processing time, I guess it's such an arbitrary number to begin with the processing
Yeah.
time of these developments. But it's really interesting. I'm gonna have to think more about that one, and maybe we can resume that conversation on Twitter or something.
It would be a great conversation, I think, in a few months, especially when it will be very telling.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of things at play too. It's not necessarily just on the city, right? It's also rules around construction sites now, and
Yeah.
all the other things that a developer thinks of before even applying. So
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Are you, actually, on that note, do you think that now, like, do you think that these considerations are going to have an impact on the way that people are thinking about developing? Like, are they going to say, okay, if I gotta spit this out and we deal with another COVID, I might want to build it this way so that I know that I can, we can still run things with one guy per suite or whatever. Does that, like, is that kind of thinking coming in, or is that still too early?
hmm I would think so. I mean, when I was previously working in development, a main core of your business, which is so, so important, is due diligence.
Yeah.
And I would say that there was a webinar that I was listening to from the Urban Development Institute here, and I forget the exact number, so I can't give you stats.
It's okay.
But it was something like the amount of time that developers are putting into due diligence now is 2 or 3 times what it used to be.
Right.
And we were already so focused on that. So what we also pride at Ratio.City too is being able to provide developers, planners, whoever it may be working in land use,
Yeah,
provide them with that tool, that whatever it may be that they need to look into for their due diligence, because we realize you're spending that much more time on it.
for sure.
We want to be able to provide that to you. And I think that's going to be really valuable.
I
This is
think
like,
that's huge. Like,
yeah, it's
I was
really,
actually going to ask as you, but I'm glad you mentioned it. Like, how much? Because, like, I'm just thinking, yeah, you can find all of these things online anyway, but the aggregation of it for guys searching across multiple municipalities, across so many different secondary plans now in these urban areas, like, it just becomes and it's so much work. Like, as I do it a lot, I'm often front loading a lot of that for my clients. If they're doing a land development, like, they want to know before they pay a planner, they want me to answer some of those questions, right?
it's a lot of digging. It really is. I
So much
mean,
work.
I'm a planner, and sometimes I am so confused at certain websites and having
Yeah,
to go through several links and not able to find things. So, yeah, I think the aggregation is really important, and how you're able to use that to produce analysis for you. And even if you're, let's say, running into I don't know, a council, municipal meeting, a partnership meeting for a JV, anything. You have these things at your fingertips that would have maybe taken you hours, if not days.
yeah,
And you can do it in 5 minutes to help you. And I think that's really important, especially because so many things are changing now. And I think we're all pivoting a lot more with our business model or our acquisitions plans than ever
for sure,
before. So I
for
think
sure.
that's really important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the competitiveness of acquisition in urban areas, and especially Toronto right now, like, it requires you to be looking at so many sites. Like, whereas before, you could take out the laser, you could pinpoint the site that you wanted to go after, you could do all the due diligence and not have to worry about somebody else beating you to the punch by the time you were ready to make a decision. And now, guys are looking at 10, 20 sites before they pick their next development.
Right.
And like that, like you said, if they're spending now 3 times the time and doing 3 times, let's just say 3 times the amount of looking and evaluating sites, that's like an astronomical change in a drain on resources. So it really impressive. I'm definitely going to check out what you guys are doing, like, because I think from a real estate perspective, brokers could massively leverage this to promote sites as well.
Yeah, and we do have broker clients as well. It's definitely something that we found on an individual basis is even helpful for them.
For sure.
But do let me know if you want a demo.
I will. I'm going to. So take that as my letting you know. I'm going to ask you
Official.
for a demo. Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else you want to discuss that you feel like could bring value to people in the real estate industry?
um, I think I'm just as curious as everyone else.
Yeah. No, that's why
Um,
it's nice to just have these chats, right? Just to figure out
yeah,
what the hell's going
yeah.
on.
I think I agree with your theme the most, that just working together and sharing information is probably the number one thing that
Yeah.
we should and can rely on right now,
Yeah.
because it's only going to help us and calm us down, really, and
Yeah.
make us feel better, and make us better decision makers, I suppose, for the future, right? I mean, we're all in this together anyway, and we're all kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
And we're only going to be able to move forward if there's even more openness and transparency. I know there's still some silos across certain industries, so it would also be nice if this kind of allowed us to open up more with each other.
Yeah.
like we said too, information's out there. So it's not really a matter of keeping that to ourselves anymore. I think we can be really open and share that, and just try to create better value for everyone through that.
Yeah. Yeah. At the beginning, I thought it was kind of like very woo woo, like Tony Robbins to be saying like, we're all in this together. But I like,
Some people probably still agree with you.
yeah, but and every time it comes out of my mouth, it feels weird because it's just not very characteristic of me. But I really truly believe that this is just, like it's been revealed to us how interdependent we really are, and how important it is for us to figure out how to dig our way out of this.
Yeah.
Because they're like, like you can't do that alone, really. Like, even if like, no matter how much cash you have on the sidelines and you want to play the market or whatever, like we got to figure this whole thing out together.
Yeah, and nor would you want to. We're so curious. We want to know what others are doing and how
Yeah.
they're adapting, and that'll only better help us make decisions, right?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's been like, I'm actually overwhelmed with the feedback that I've had, that a lot of people have just been really grateful to get like like the same way that you and I find comfort in getting the looking at things on a massive scale as a result of data, right? And seeing, because like that, I feel the same way. It's like as soon as you can acknowledge something in a big way, and see that the trend is there and it's verifiable and quantifiable by data, that I'm the same way. That gives me a lot of comfort. But and the other thing is, like, people are calling each other more than ever. They're talking to each other more than ever. They're just making sure everybody is okay. And I think that we, as an industry, we hadn't really done that so much on a professional level. Is everything good at your company? How are you guys dealing with changes? Are you suffering? Like, is construction, are construction slow? Are people still showing up with deposits, etc.? A lot of people really want answers to those questions, and even if it's a bad answer, at least they know it, right? And
Right. I
right,
do
and
hope that continues in the future.
yeah,
That we just open up and we share. Maybe
yeah,
every company has some sort of like you're doing a podcast or
yeah,
some sort of video that will just say, "Hey, this is where we're at."
yeah, yeah. It's a little bit of create a little bit of transparency there to just help people understand what's going on everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to be mindful of your time because it sounds like you're very busy, and I'm glad to
Oh,
hear that. But uh, is there anywhere that you would like for people to reach out to you if they choose to, if they want to learn about Ratio.City, if they want to just connect with you and pick your brain on all the things that you're an expert on? Where would you prefer that they contact you?
yeah, of course. So they can always, of course, go to the Ratio City website. There's a bunch of information on the platform there. I don't think my individual contact information is there. And I'm not sure, perhaps with this video, if you have a platform where I could post that for you.
Yeah.
Um, or I can
Yeah.
provide my email address on here and they can reach
Yeah.
out to
No,
me.
yeah, I can I can put it in the show notes and in the YouTube comments. I can just put
That would be great.
yeah, okay, awesome.
Yeah, very open to feedback or conversation. Like you said, I'm really happy to have chats with anyone, whether they're in this
Amazing.
industry or not. So,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great.
yeah.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for your time. And you actually gave me some really good, some light bulbs went off there. Like a lot of the things that I've been learning, they ultimately become conclusions of assumptions that I already had. And I'm grateful for that. But you really got me thinking about a couple of different things. And I wish that I was prepared and I had prepared you properly
Oh,
with the questions. Cause I feel like we could have really, dug in there, but honestly, very
well, we can have
insightful. I
round
really
two.
appreciate
It's
it.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I've scheduled a lot of follow-ups with people because, in the early on in this, we were making assumptions about things that were completely wrong, right? And then we get to follow up and be like, okay, well, where were we right? Where were we wrong? Are we happy with how things are going? And so yeah, I'd love to do that actually, maybe in like a month or so.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been very valuable for me.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.